Bad Boss Brief, a strategic guide on how to not be an asshole at work. We'll tell you about bad bosses, how they can be handled, how to tell if you happen to be one. An executive and an executive coach, both artists working in advertising and marketing for more than 2 decades, are here to advise you on the ins and outs of office environments. The Bad Boss Brief is your ultimate guide to navigating any employment landscape. Here are your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo.
Hey, welcome to Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Peirolo.
And I am Eugene S. Robinson.
And today...
Practicing the R's.
You do? Okay, good. Good to know. It's episode 10. Can you believe we're at episode 10 already?
I can. It's been 10 wonderful episodes. If you've missed them, you can go back and see them.
Yeah, we actually just moved to Substack. We're consolidating everything at Substack, so you can go back and find that and hopefully start participating in notes. Stay tuned for additional cool stuff that we're going to do. But today we are going to talk about the cost of sexism. And we decided to do this for 2 reasons. One, no one sent in any suggestions. So just a reminder, if you want us to talk about something, WTF at badbossbrief.com. Mm-hmm. But the second reason is there was some compelling news. So 2 news items got us thinking about this. The first, as you may have heard, former President Donald Trump was convicted by a jury in a civil case of sexually abusing and defaming Eugene Carroll. And she was awarded $5 million. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm referring to my notes here for those that are watching the video because sexual abuse and defamation was it sounds like sort of a middle ground. Eugene Carroll has accused Trump of rape. They gave the jury 3 different options of what to convict him on: rape, sexual abuse, or I think it's the third one's like forcible touching. So they went for the middle ground, but they did go ahead and say that he had defamed her in posts on Truth Social. And it seemed as if his reaction was to turn around and defame her further. Right?
Yeah.
So impunity.
Yeah. It's amazing to me that there was even any discussion that her legal team had to go public with a statement indicating that they were thinking about suing him. You know what? If you want to play ATM, I'll sue you every day of the week if that's what you like. If that's a game that you like to play, because guess what? I've got $5 million right now. I can hire good legal counsel, and like I said from the beginning, me as Eugene Carroll, it was never about the money for me in the first place. So see you in a court again. Keep it up.
Right. Exactly. But the one that I wanted to spend a little more time on is on May 8th, Goldman Sachs said that it would pay $215 million to settle a class action lawsuit that the bank discriminated against thousands of women who worked there. Yeah. And this goes back quite some time. Yeah. So before we get all excited that Goldman Sachs has a $215 million reward, let's just do the math. Right. So if we're talking about the cost of sexism, what I'm looking here is the cost to individual women and the cost to society. So there were about 2,800 women who participated in this class action lawsuit. Right. It was brought by, I think, 3 women. But then when they opened it up to class action, they had 2,800 women. So let's do the math. Lawyers typically take a third. Then you divide that between the rest of the women, and each one will receive roughly $50,000. Okay. So $50,000, hey, it's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, right? $50,000 is great, but let's look at what that means for these women. Okay.
I guarantee you, were they still to be employed at Goldman Sachs, $50K doesn't come close to touching the bonuses they would have gotten just pro forma.
Exactly. And when you look at this, so the women, in order to be part of this class action, they had to be more senior than an associate vice president, right? So AVP, fairly senior. And they were told what they won, the judgment, was that Goldman Sachs held back women's career advancement through a performance review system that favored men. So the women lost out on promotions and they lost out on raises. So these were the highest earning women probably in the world, right? These are the women that can actually make some money. And then if you look at it, if you look at how much money it would take, so let's say that one of those women was working at Goldman Sachs in 2003, and she got a bonus of $50,000, right?
Mhm.
Which, from what I
It's
understand,
low.
is really low. That's like you performed, you showed up to work, you didn't get
Right.
fired. If she put that into a savings account that it had a 5% return, she would now have $135,000 in that bank account. That's just putting in 50,000. So 3x, right? 3x. And we would assume that a woman that is working at Goldman Sachs is going to have sufficient financial knowledge to understand how to make her money work for her. And so the earnings lost, the potential missed by those women in the class action lawsuit is pretty significant.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, but and I'm sure I've had friends who worked at Goldman Sachs and women I know who worked at McKinsey, and it should be known that they treat their it's like the worst hazing system in the world. Unless you are unless you're a full partner, you're treated like dirt, and they fully expect 93% of you to wash out. So the 7% that distinguish themselves had to put up with a pretty egregious behavior all along. The problem with the women issue is that it kind of accreted around expected and typical tropes. Like they're abusing everybody, but they're not abusing everybody by, hey, nice legs. They're not doing that to everybody, right? They're just doing that to women, right? Hey, let's go on a company camping trip. You show up and it's just your boss. They're not doing that to everybody. They're just doing that to the women, right? And that it becomes part of the routine policy, of course. Like that, when those who are hazed become in a position to haze, then they're equally assholeish, and people are loath to say anything because the amount of money is incredible. My friend who worked at McKinsey for like 5 years, dedicated 5 years of her life to McKinsey, and at that point, pocketed a cool 20 mil, c'est la vie, right?
Well, and this is the thing that I was thinking about is when you look at this on the individual women level,
Mhm.
right? So, in my experience, I have lost jobs because I have been harassed out of them, right? Whether it's
Yep,
actual
yep.
sexual harassment, if it's just a hostile workplace to women, if it's
Mhm,
ageism, multiple reasons, right? And again, I've had
mhm,
3 of these lawsuits settled in my favors for various
mhm.
bad behavior. What I noticed is that the personal cost on me was there were a couple of things. One was it is it's so stressful, right?
Yeah,
Like the health impacts, the impact of your body on being that stressed every day, walking into a hostile work environment day after day. I'm was a single mom for the entire time my kids were growing up. My family does not, I don't come from money. I'm one of those people where if like your car breaks down and you need $1,000 to fix it, you best figure out how you're going to get that $1,000 because there isn't, a
yep.
relative to call. And I think, the other challenge is that when I have had these situations where I've left a job, even if I
Mhm,
got some sort of a settlement, it really
mhm.
wasn't much. By the time I paid my lawyer,
Yeah,
by the time,
yep,
and then it would take me a while to get back to work.
yep,
One, I was exhausted. A lot of times I needed to take a few weeks or a couple of months just to kind of,
yep,
like get my head on straight. Then I needed to go look for work,
yep,
right? And it's hard to look for work when you are emotionally exhausted. It's hard to
yeah.
look for work when you have had this traumatic work experience.
And that's
Somebody's
not even touching how you explain your exit.
exactly. Exactly. And I know, I mean, Seattle is a large metropolitan area, but the group of people that work in advertising in Seattle
Mhm,
it's like a tiny neighborhood with 4 streets. Everybody
yeah,
knows somebody who knows somebody,
yeah,
right? Which is great if you have a good reputation, right? But it's challenging if something gets out there. Like I remember my first settlement, this was in the 90s, right? So this was a long, long time ago. And I
mhm,
remember thinking to myself, okay, I could take what they're offering and sign their NDA, which means I can
mhm,
never say how much money they gave me, or I could sue them. And
mhm,
immediately I was like, if I sue them for sexual harassment, I will never work in Seattle again.
mhm.
And I really believed that. I was in high tech, right? I was in a startup, working over in Bellevue, again, another teeny small neighborhood.
Yep,
And I knew that I couldn't sue. And that makes me sad now looking back at,
yep,
30, early 30s me, right? That's the
yep,
age of my
yep.
daughter now. The
Yeah, right.
idea that she was so oppressed in the system that she
Yep.
knew she believed she could not have legal recourse,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That just, it messes with your head in a way. And my
Yep.
concern is that there are women who experienced this at Goldman Sachs who left the workplace altogether,
Hmm.
right? And not
Hmm.
because they had a dream to pursue to, be a kindergarten teacher or work at a nonprofit. That may very well be, but because they were so burned by that particular system that they can't participate anymore.
Institutionally, it hews to a friend of mine. Actually, was forced to go into the Marines by the court, and so he was in the Marines, and I saw him his first break, and I go, how is it? He goes, well, it's kind of a little bit rough, but it's better than prison, which were his choices, and he told me a story about a guy who was not hanging very well. Started to have mental health issues and then fundamentally ended up killing himself.
Mm,
And I go, I bet that was a wake up call. He looks at me like, what do you mean? It's like, I bet, the drill sergeants, they, back. He goes, no, 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 no. They piled on. Now the guy was gone. They piled on as a cautionary tale. If you are you worthless piece of garbage, don't end up like that fat SOB. And so I start to think that, you know, $215 million is not enough to get the attention of the executives at Goldman Sachs in any way, shape, or form.
right.
And they got an insurance policy to cover that. I don't think that's enough to force institutional change. And the thing is, it is counter good business. It is just bad business. I mean, let's forget about the feelings and the philosophical aspect of whether or not we should. It is just bad business, and I guess they just build that into the system because why not?
Well, and I think what's interesting is like you look at it bad business in multiple ways, right? So,
Right.
we all know, or you all should know, that it's very hard for women to get funded for venture capital, right? Even harder still for women of color. Now, there are a number of women, some of whom I know or know of, who could be great
Mhm.
at starting a business, who could give great value, who could employ people, who have really good ideas. They can't get money, whereas, there are other founders who have gotten a lot of capital who have proven to be not great at what they do.
Yeah.
I've seen all the shows on WeWork. I've read all the things. It's like
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
kind of a classic example. Those women don't have an opportunity to do that and to build our economy and to provide opportunities.
Mhm.
And when you look at that, it's the same thing with these big companies. I mean, I work with people who are leading organizations that use creatives, right? They make cool
Mhm.
shit. That's what I say.
Mhm.
And if you're like a Disney or any company that is relying on some form of genius in the people that work
Yep.
for you,
Yep.
and you are taking half of the world, like all of the female identified people, and treating them badly, you're having a talent drain that's completely not necessary, right? It's an
Yep. Yep.
unforced error. And I think
Yep.
that's one of the things is like recognizing that you're missing out not just on like the dollars and cents of business, but any kind of R&D, any kind of
Yep.
future
Yep.
endeavors, any of
Yep.
those kinds of things. It's kind of like
Yep.
like following the writer's strike now. What's
Yeah.
going to happen, because I remember the last time there was a writer's
Yeah.
strike.
Yeah.
In a few months we're going to stop seeing anything that's scripted,
Yep.
right? And I
Yep.
got through the pandemic watching really good scripted television, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
only so many things you can watch from other countries, right?
Yeah.
And so
Right.
the
Right.
idea of like we're going to see that, and it's going to be ongoing, and it could last for months and months, right? It could have a really significant impact. And I feel like there are women in every industry who are going on strike without desiring to, right? They just they
Yeah.
just can't stand being there anymore.
Yep. Yep. And this is, I mean, I think of Richard Pryor actually in one of his more reflective moments, so later on in his career, says something about, it's hard enough to be a person, just trying to deal. He was largely saying these existential issues. He goes, and then he's walking along, minding his own business, and somebody hurls some racial invective at him. He goes, and now I got to deal with this. you it's like just being a person is tough enough without this. But what's interesting about this is that it indicates to me that it's not a casual belief, right? It's not a casual belief. It is actually a hard wired in, hard coded belief, because it's not like they're aggressively pursuing it, but it is like Chris Rock at one point said when I interviewed him, he was like, you know, uh, there's stuff that passes between couples nowadays that were my grandfather alive, or maybe he was alive, but that if I tried to explain it to my grandfather would be completely crazy to him. It doesn't compute with this World War II era kind of mentality. He can't understand it. It's like going in and speaking some ersatz fake Esperanto or something. He does not understand it. So I think that these people who run these organizations, it's just an acceptable cost of doing business, and we're not going to change. And it's like I think what the understanding is, why care about women, because they're just going to go get married and have kids and fuck off anyway. And and that is like, what decade are you in? What decade have you been in? And I think people who share that kind of psychological monograph they're all in the same decade, and that decade never changes, and that decade probably starts with the 1950s. And
But the thing is, and they're still in power, right? And the ones that are doing, performing these, like, sexism is right next door to homophobia, which is right next door to ableism and ageism, all of these things. And it's just, it was interesting. I was reading this article today in the New York Times because, of course, about DEI, right? And what people like me who are consultants who work in just general consulting, but particularly DEI consultants, they're
Mhm,
starting to use DEIB for belonging.
mhm.
And I'm reading this article because, of course, you and I are doing a Bad Boss Brief Live in Seattle, June 7th,
June 7th.
on the DEI lie. So I'm reading this article, and I actually have heard of DEIB and the inclusion of belonging and have been using it with my clients for months now. But my
Mhm.
interpretation was it's not enough to hire people who have been disenfranchised. You need to go go to some lengths to make them feel welcome. The people that you
Yes,
hire need to belong, right? It's not enough to
yes.
just, hire the black guy, keep him for, 8 months to a year, and then
And then lay
he's
them off.
driven out and then lay him off. Right. For example, just making up
Yeah,
an example.
just out of that
Yeah,
at the top of my head.
just
Yeah.
whatever. But and so the idea is that organizations need to be intentional about how they're going to do retention. That's my understanding of DEIB. But according to the article in the New York Times this morning, the B for belonging is to make white people feel better.
Hmm.
Right.
Mm,
So
mm.
belonging means everybody's supposed to get to show up at work authentically. And let's not make it into, white people into villains. And we
Yeah,
can talk
yeah.
more about this on June 7th, but it's the thing is what I was thinking about with any of these issues. So I was at a fundraiser for a great nonprofit in Washington State called Team Child.
Hmm.
Full disclosure, my partner works there, but so that's why I was at this
Hmm.
fundraiser,
Hmm.
right? And Team Child provides free legal services for youth in Washington
Nice,
State. So you need a
nice.
lawyer because for whatever reason you can get a free lawyer through Team Child. So they're doing this
Yep.
great fundraiser, and this woman who's a lawyer who works with these teens is talking about her experience and her lived experience, how she ended up in this job, and she said the criminal justice system is working the way it was designed.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
And this is after describing the racism, the horrors, right, that you find in the criminal justice system, and how badly these kids need attorneys.
Yeah.
And I thought about that. That just kept echoing in my mind, right? Because I do believe that the justice system is working as it was
Yep.
supposed to
Yep.
work, right?
Yep.
And I feel like capitalism and corporate America is the system is working the way it was designed to work.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and I'm sorry to have gone generational there for a second, but the reality of it is that I'm always shocked when it's people from our generation or younger who are doing the same stuff. And I'm thinking about the guy from American Apparel. I'm thinking about Shane from Vice, who
Right.
got kind of shuffled off and replaced by Nancy DeBoo for essentially running a frat house. And I'm shocked at I'm shocked that it seems to be something that's contagious enough so that you got people who very clearly should know a whole hell of a lot better and are just doing the same stuff. It's like, the guy from American Apparel walking around the office in his underwear and openly masturbating in the office. Never at any point did this, at the time when he got busted for it, was maybe in his late 30s. Did maybe he could have asked himself, say, hey, I've worked at 0 jobs where the boss has walked around in his underwear and masturbated with his door open. Am I out of line here? 0 jobs where that's happened, but I'm going to be the first guy to make that happen. Come
Right.
on, come
And
on.
and
Shocking to
he's
me.
and he's the white guy that got the funding, that got the acclaim.
Yes,
So I want to
yes,
I want to go back and do the practical tips because I know people like practical
yes.
tips, okay? So I think one of the practical tips is, this is actually something I was told. I was at a meeting in Seattle a few years ago before the pandemic, the in person, and I was talking to a venture capitalist who was a woman. There aren't a lot of
Mm,
women VCs, and she's
mm,
very respected. And she said women are done with their peak earning years at the end of their 50s.
mhm,
And I was like, what are you talking about? Because I was in my 50s and I wasn't ready to be done with anything.
mhm.
And she said, men are done with their peak earning in their late 60s.
Tuh,
Women,
okay,
generally, it's in their late 50s.
okay.
Right. And I thought about it and I'm like, I don't know any other women in technology and advertising that I know personally that are our age that are still working. I don't know any. I know that they exist. I know that there are women at that age, but there aren't very many. And so
Mhm,
what I think is key is that if you are a woman, plan for the fact that your chief earning, your peak earning is going to be in your 40s and between 40 and 55. Just
mhm,
plan for
mhm,
that, right? If you're
mhm,
pleasantly
mhm,
surprised otherwise, and make money, right? So
mhm.
I've talked to a lot of women over the years because I teach negotiation, and there's a lot of very senior women who don't want to advocate for themselves, who have said
Mhm.
something to me like, "Well, I'm the CEO, I'm the most highly paid person in the company," and like, as you should be, you're the CEO. And they're
Yep.
diffident about asking for more money in ways
Yeah.
that men never are. And so if
Yeah.
you're in a position to make more money
Yep.
because you just, let's assume that you won't be able to work past 55, right?
Yep.
You may be
Yep.
sexually harassed out of the work world. I hope not. The other
Yep.
thing that I think women forget is that, women, particularly women who are married, maybe they have young children, the reality is a lot of marriages end in divorce, and
Mhm.
almost without exception, the if it's a to a woman and a man being married, the woman ends up far worse off financially than she was before the
Mhm.
divorce, and the man
Mhm.
ends up far better, right? And so one of the things that I think women make a
Didn't happen in
mistake,
my case, but okay.
but statistics show that it certainly
Yeah.
happened in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
case.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
so I think it's also recognizing that you need to plan, just like, if you're doing retirement planning, you're planning for, what if I have an illness? What if my spouse has an illness? You try to think of the different scenarios.
Mm.
Women, please, you need to plan financially for what happens if your husband is not there because he
Yeah.
leaves and takes all of his assets with him,
Yeah. Right.
right? And
Right.
I think
Right.
this is one of the challenges, is that women aren't trained to think about the fact that, like, you may have to support yourself all the way through, and
Yep.
it's much easier to stockpile whatever money you can in your 40s and in your early 50s than it is to try to go back and earn it in your 60s or your 70s as a woman. So that's the reality that I would say, is try to maximize that 40 to
Mhm.
55, make as much
Mhm.
money as you can. Um, have your kids pay for college or take on student loans. Please do not take on your own kids' student loans. That's another
Mhm.
subject for
Mhm.
another day. So that's the practicals.
Apropos of that, I just, as a side note, there's been a raft of women who have poisoned their husbands recently. I've noted, but that's not the interesting part to me. What's interesting to me is that the husbands talked about it prior to finally succumbing. It's like one guy even went so far, and these are professional people, as to put a camera in the kitchen, and he still drank the orange juice. I don't understand it, but anyway,
Hey, listen, do we have a
that's a
do we have a
side
fire
note.
me? Do we have a fire me?
Yeah, 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 yeah. We do have a fire me, and it's super interesting to me about you. There was a famous quote about the 3 types of secrets, and one type of secret is those we share, those I keep from you, and those about future events as yet unknown. Meaning, you can't tell what's going to happen, right? So, um, when when I am connected to a guy named John Nash, who's he does is a financial columnist on mixed martial arts, and he has gotten his hands on a tranche of documents connected to this endeavor, which used to be William Morris, the big one, is the biggest agents, probably the biggest agency in the world, and their recent purchase of WWE, which has a CEO, multiple sex harassment cases, as well as the UFC, which has a CEO who on New Year's Eve was slapping his wife and kicking her on video. Um, so, but it's interesting that essentially what they have figured out is that during the dry days of the UFC, when John McCain was calling it human cockfighting, and they were it was illegal in places, they were shutting down events and arresting people. What Dana White, who was the CEO of the UFC, the one who was slapping and kicking his wife on New Year's Eve, what he discovered is that the only person to kind of be interested in his property, one of the few people, was Donald Trump,
Mm.
casino operator, and this is a friendship that's endured. But that's not even the point that I'm getting to. What it has done is it's framed a workplace. It's a MAGA workplace. The UFC is a MAGA workplace, and people who advance the idea of MAGA living in any way, shape, or form, up to and including being photographed with Andrew Tate, who's been arrested in Romania for sex trafficking and is one of these men's right activist types, or 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 hang out with Kadyrov in Chechnya, who is running murdering gay people there. They have not just implicitly, tacitly, but explicitly signed off on it. At the same time as they are, if you have to go down deep in the paperwork where they have an official company policy, which is a pure CYA maneuver, that we abhor racism, sexism, homophobia. We're all accepting, but fuck wokeism. But we're all accepting, but So it is clearly a case of a boss who is what is that expression? Talking out of both sides of his mouth in a professional setting that is to their great benefit. They're covering their asses for lawsuits, but at the same time they're currying favor who they think their base is, and it's really difficult and alienating for the portions of fans that they clearly don't care about, or at least their fighters who they also don't care about. And it's not a red light district sports thing because they're now owned and report to Ari Emanuel, who is the brother of Rahm Emanuel, former hotshot in many political, Democratic administrations, but still, everybody's like, what? Alfred E. Newman? What? Me? Worry? No. So the fire me is these guys have no protection. The fighters have no protection. The men, women fighters have no protection. They get 17% of the profits, which is like probably about 33% less than any other sport on the face of the earth. And nothing at all will change at this point. Now going to the UFC is like going to a political rally for Trump. So I'd like to have a fire me segment for Dana White. I'd like to give him a hail hearty, good job, buddy, but it's not really a good job you're doing. It's
Yeah.
a really bad job. It's bad for everybody.
Oh.
So that's my segment.
Okay. And then to talk a little bit about some future things, as we mentioned, we're doing the Bad Boss Brief live in Seattle, June 7th, Wednesday at 6 o'clock. It's free. You just go to Eventbrite. You can look at my social media, DNA, who is our host. And it was actually interesting because somebody sent Alan, who runs DNA, who's hosting us, an article by a guy named Jeff Hayden that says, if you have a bad boss, it makes you perform badly now, and that effect can last for up to 10 years.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about this sexism, we're talking about this kind of destructive behavior, studies show that it can impact you as an employee negatively for up to a decade. And certainly while you're working for that bad boss, which I thought was interesting. So join us live. We will be there. And then again, as we mentioned at the beginning, we're moving over to Substack. This is going to be free. You can keep hearing Bad Boss Brief free, but we're starting a new section called Sub Rosa. And we are taking questions about bad bosses, about work advice that is going to be behind a paywall, because we figure there's only going to be a few of us there and we can speak openly and freely. So if you have a question, send it to WTF@badbossbrief.com. Let us know if it's a Sub Rosa section or if you just want us to talk about it generally. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We will keep you posted. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. See you in a couple of weeks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Bad Boss Brief with your hosts, Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Peirolo. You can check out more of their work by visiting consigliera.substack.com for Stephanie and eugenesrobinson.substack.com for Eugene. You can also find Eugene at Mr. Sleep 3, that's the number 3, on Instagram. Send us your questions or comments to WTF@badbossbrief.com, and be sure to join us right here on your favorite podcast platform for more insights every other week. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work.